My wife looked me straight in the eyes and demanded 90% of everything I owned. She thought the judge would hand her my house, my business, and my life savings. She even smiled and said, "You'll never beat me in court." But what she didn't know was that one document, signed years earlier, was about to destroy her entire plan. And when the judge revealed the final verdict, she broke down in tears. Stay with me, because this story proves that greed can cost you everything. The day my wife asked for a divorce wasn't the hardest part. The hardest part was what she demanded afterward. My name is Daniel, and for 12 years I believed my wife, Rachel, and I were building a future together. We had a beautiful home, 2 cars, and a successful construction business that I had spent years growing from nothing. I worked 16-hour days, missed holidays, and sacrificed weekends so our family could live comfortably. Rachel never worked after we got married. She said she wanted to focus on our home, and I respected that decision. I paid every bill, funded every vacation, and never questioned her spending. But somewhere along the way, money became more important to her than our marriage. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen table with a folder in her hand. "I want a divorce," she said calmly. I felt like the air had disappeared from the room. Before I could even process those words, she slid the folder toward me. "I also want 90% of everything." I stared at her, thinking it had to be a joke. 90%? She nodded confidently. "The house, the business, the savings, everything. You can keep the rest." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She wasn't crying. She wasn't emotional. She was negotiating. Then she smiled and said something that sent chills down my spine. "You'll never beat me in court." Rachel wasted no time after asking for the divorce. Within days, she hired one of the most expensive divorce attorneys in the city, a lawyer known for winning high-profile financial settlements. The moment I heard his name, I knew she wasn't looking for a fair separation. She was preparing for a battle. The legal papers started arriving almost every week. Every envelope that showed up at my front door carried another demand, another accusation, or another attempt to pressure me into giving up more of what I'd spent years building. It felt as though the woman who once celebrated every milestone with me had suddenly become my biggest opponent. Rachel's attorney painted a picture that barely resembled our real marriage. According to the documents, Rachel had sacrificed her own career so I could build my company. They argued that every success my business achieved was possible only because she had stayed home and supported me emotionally. They claimed that without her encouragement, I never would have become successful. Then came the biggest demand of all. Rachel wasn't just asking for a larger share of our assets, she wanted lifetime financial support. She argued that because she had grown accustomed to a comfortable lifestyle, I should continue paying for it long after our marriage ended. Reading those words was almost harder than reading the divorce papers themselves. It wasn't because of the money. It was because every page made it seem as though my years of hard work, sleepless nights, and personal sacrifices counted for nothing. The stress quickly spread beyond the courtroom. Friends began calling me almost every day. Some genuinely wanted to know what had happened. Others had already heard Rachel's version of the story before speaking to me. According to the rumors, I had become selfish after making money. Some believed I had neglected my marriage. Others assumed Rachel was simply fighting for what she deserved. A few friends stopped returning my calls altogether. People I had trusted for years quietly disappeared from my life without ever asking for my side of the story. For a while, it hurt. I wanted to defend myself. I wanted everyone to know the truth. But I chose to remain silent. Not because I was afraid. Not because I believed Rachel was right. I stayed silent because I knew something she had completely forgotten. 5 years earlier, my construction company had nearly collapsed. One major client had cancelled a series of contracts, suppliers were demanding payment, and I honestly believed I was going to lose everything I had worked for. During that difficult time, I met with experienced financial and legal advisors who helped me protect the business from future risks. Following their advice, I transferred ownership of the company into a properly structured legal business trust. Every document was prepared professionally, every requirement was followed, and every signature was completed exactly as the law required. Rachel had been present during several of those meetings. She signed the necessary paperwork without asking many questions, trusting me to handle the business side of our finances. At the time, she wasn't interested in legal documents. She simply assumed everything would always belong to us personally. Years passed, and she completely forgot those papers ever existed. Now, as she demanded 90% of the company, she believed the business was still owned directly by me. She thought my success automatically meant easy money waiting to be divided. She had no idea that the legal structure protecting the company had been established years before the divorce was ever mentioned. When I finally met with my attorney and handed him Rachel's demands, he carefully reviewed every document before opening the company records and trust agreements. He read quietly for several minutes. Then he leaned back in his chair, smiled confidently, and looked directly at me. "This case isn't going to end the way she thinks," he said. For the first time since Rachel asked for the divorce, the constant weight on my shoulders began to lift. I walked out of that office feeling something I hadn't experienced in weeks: hope. That night, for the first time in what felt like forever, I slept peacefully, knowing that the truth was finally on my side, and soon the courtroom would reveal it. The day of the final court hearing arrived faster than I expected. I barely slept the night before. Even though my attorney had repeatedly assured me that the law was on our side, walking into a courtroom where the future of everything I had worked for would be decided was enough to make anyone nervous. When I entered the courthouse that morning, the hallway was already crowded with lawyers, families, and people waiting for their own cases to be called. The atmosphere was tense. Every person there seemed to be carrying a story of broken relationships, disappointment, or betrayal. Then I saw Rachel. She walked through the courthouse doors wearing an expensive designer dress, carrying a luxury handbag, and looking as confident as ever. She smiled politely at a few people before taking her seat beside her attorney. She never looked in my direction. It was almost as if I had become a complete stranger. Seeing her so calm surprised me. After 12 years together, I expected at least a little emotion. Instead, she appeared completely focused on one thing: the financial outcome of the divorce. When our case was finally called, everyone stood as the judge entered the courtroom. After a few opening formalities, Rachel's attorney rose from his chair and confidently approached the judge. He spoke with absolute certainty. According to him, Rachel had devoted the best years of her life to supporting my career. He argued that while I built a successful construction company, she had sacrificed her own professional future to take care of our home and provide emotional support whenever I needed it. He described Rachel as a loyal wife who had helped create the comfortable life we enjoyed. Then he shifted the focus toward money. He argued that fairness demanded Rachel receive 90% of our marital assets because, without her sacrifices, my business would never have become successful. Every few moments, Rachel nodded in agreement, as though every word represented the complete truth. Listening to that version of our marriage was difficult. It felt like years of exhausting work, endless risks, and personal sacrifices had been reduced to a simple story that ignored everything I had actually endured to build the company. When Rachel's attorney finally finished, he returned to his seat looking completely satisfied. He clearly believed the strongest arguments had already been made. Then my attorney slowly stood up. Unlike Rachel's lawyer, he didn't speak dramatically or try to appeal to emotion. He simply walked to the front of the courtroom, carrying several organized folders. "Your Honor," he began calmly, "the facts of this case are best explained through documentation. One by one, he submitted years of financial records into evidence. Every tax return, every annual business report, every company registration, every financial statement, every ownership document. Instead of relying on emotional arguments, he relied on facts."
The courtroom became unusually quiet as everyone watched the evidence being reviewed. Then my attorney presented the document that changed everything: the business trust agreement. He carefully explained that years before the divorce, the company had been legally transferred into a properly established business trust, following professional, legal, and financial advice. Every requirement had been satisfied. Every document had been signed. Every filing had been completed, according to the law. The judge adjusted his glasses and began carefully reviewing the paperwork. Several minutes passed without anyone speaking. The silence felt endless. For the first time that morning, I noticed Rachel's expression beginning to change. The confidence she had carried into the courtroom slowly disappeared. She leaned toward her attorney and quietly whispered something. He quickly flipped through his own files. The confident smile he had worn only moments earlier vanished. His face became noticeably tense. The judge continued reading before finally looking up from the documents. Then he asked Rachel a simple question. "Mrs. Carter, do you recognize these documents?" Rachel looked down at the papers. Her hands hesitated. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Finally, the judge asked another question. "Did you sign these documents?" The courtroom became completely silent. Every person waiting to hear the answer seemed to stop breathing. Rachel slowly lowered her head. Her voice was barely above a whisper. Yes, that single word changed the entire direction of the case. The judge explained that while certain marital assets would still be considered during the divorce proceedings, the construction company itself had been placed into a legally recognized structure years before. Ownership and property rights would therefore be determined according to the applicable legal documents, not simply by Rachel's expectations. He further explained that property division would focus on the assets that legally qualified as marital property and that demands for 90% of everything had no legal foundation based on the evidence before the court. As the judge spoke, Rachel's face turned pale. She looked back and forth between her attorney and the paperwork, hoping someone would correct what she was hearing. No one did. Her attorney quietly closed his folder. For the first time since the divorce began, Rachel realized that confidence alone couldn't overcome documented facts. And for the first time all day, the woman who had promised, "You'll never beat me in court," looked genuinely afraid. Very afraid. After several hours of testimony, legal arguments, and careful review of every document submitted into evidence, the courtroom fell completely silent. Everyone knew the moment had finally arrived. The judge placed the last folder on the bench, looked around the courtroom, and prepared to deliver the final decision. My heart was pounding. Although my attorney had been confident throughout the case, nothing is ever certain until the judge speaks. Months of stress, sleepless nights, and endless uncertainty had all led to this single moment. Rachel sat only a few feet away from me. She still tried to appear calm, but I could see the nervousness she was struggling to hide. Earlier that morning, she had entered the courtroom, believing victory was guaranteed. Now, after the business trust documents had been reviewed, that confidence had completely disappeared. The judge began reading the ruling slowly and carefully. He explained that the purpose of the court was not to reward one spouse or punish the other. The law required a fair and reasonable division of marital property based on evidence, legal ownership, and the facts presented during the proceedings. He first addressed the assets that clearly belonged to both of us. The family home, which we had purchased during our marriage, would be sold. After all outstanding debts and selling expenses were paid, the remaining proceeds would be divided fairly between us according to the law. Next came our joint savings accounts and investment funds. Because those assets had been accumulated during the marriage, they would also be divided according to the legal standards for marital property. The judge then ruled that our personal belongings, household furniture, and other shared possessions would be divided equally, ensuring that neither side received an unfair advantage. Rachel listened quietly. She seemed relieved for a brief moment. Then the judge reached the issue everyone had been waiting for: the construction company. The courtroom became completely silent again. The judge explained that after reviewing the financial records, ownership documents, trust agreements, and testimony presented by both parties, the court found that the company had been legally transferred into a properly established business trust years before the divorce proceedings began. Every required document had been properly executed. Every filing had been completed according to the law. Because of that legal structure, the company itself was not subject to the division Rachel had requested. The ruling was clear. Rachel would not receive ownership of the business. She would not receive 90%. She would not receive half. The construction company would remain protected under its existing legal structure. For a moment, nobody spoke. Then the judge addressed one final issue that seemed directed at Rachel's extraordinary demands. He explained that divorce courts exist to ensure fairness, not to reward greed or unrealistic expectations. While every spouse deserves a fair evaluation of their legal rights, unsupported demands for overwhelming control of marital assets have no place in a courtroom where decisions must be based on evidence and the law. His words echoed through the silent courtroom. I slowly let out a breath I felt I had been holding for months. The weight that had been sitting on my shoulders since Rachel first handed me the divorce papers finally began to disappear. Across the room, Rachel's expression changed completely. The confidence she had carried throughout the case vanished. Her face turned pale. She leaned toward her attorney and whispered something urgently, clearly hoping there was still another argument to make or another option to pursue. Her attorney listened carefully before slowly shaking his head. There was nothing more he could do. The evidence had spoken for itself. The judge's decision was final. As people began gathering their files and preparing to leave the courtroom, I quietly packed my own documents, eager to put the painful chapter behind me. Before I reached the door, I heard footsteps behind me. I turned around. Rachel was standing there. For the first time since our divorce began, she no longer looked confident or determined. She simply looked defeated. Her eyes filled with emotion as she spoke softly. I didn't think this would happen. I looked at her without anger or satisfaction. I simply waited. After a long pause, she took a deep breath and quietly said the words I never expected to hear. "We can still fix this." For a brief second, memories of our 12 years together flashed through my mind. The struggles, the dreams, the sacrifices, and the life we had built. But something about her words felt different. They didn't come when our marriage was falling apart. They didn't come when trust could still have been saved. They came only after the court had ruled, only after the money she expected to receive was gone. In that moment, I finally understood the truth. She wasn't mourning the marriage she had chosen to end. She was mourning the fortune she believed she had lost. And that realization told me everything I needed to know. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, life slowly began returning to normal. The endless court hearings were over. The stacks of legal documents stopped arriving in my mailbox. For the first time in months, I woke up without wondering what new problem the day would bring. The stress that had followed me every morning was finally beginning to fade. As I focused on moving forward, I occasionally heard news about Rachel through mutual friends. They told me she had moved into a small apartment on the other side of the city. It was a simple place, nothing like the large home we had once shared. The comfortable lifestyle she had become accustomed to had changed almost overnight. The luxury shopping trips stopped. The expensive vacations disappeared. The high-end restaurants were replaced by quiet evenings at home. For the first time in years, Rachel had to adjust to living within a much smaller budget. But what affected her even more wasn't the apartment. It was the people around her. During the divorce, many friends had stood beside her. They constantly encouraged her to demand more money and convinced her she deserved nearly everything I had worked for. They praised her decisions and assured her the court would rule in her favor. Yet after the case ended, those same friends slowly disappeared. The invitations became less frequent. The phone calls stopped. The people who had celebrated her confidence were nowhere to be found when reality arrived. It reminded me of an important lesson. Some people love standing beside success. Very few remain when success disappears. One quiet afternoon, several weeks later, my phone rang. The number looked familiar. It was Rachel. For a moment, I considered ignoring the call. But after thinking about it, I answered. Her voice sounded completely different from the confident woman I had faced in court. She sounded tired, quiet, almost broken. After a long silence, she finally spoke. "Daniel, I made a mistake. I didn't interrupt." She continued. "I thought I deserved everything."
For several seconds, neither of us spoke. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness I had carried during the divorce had slowly faded. Instead, I simply felt sadness for what our marriage had become. Finally, I answered honestly. The problem wasn't the divorce. She remained silent. I continued. The real problem was that somewhere along the way, you stopped seeing me as your husband and started seeing me as a paycheck. Those words were difficult to say, but they were true. When we first met, we dreamed together. We struggled together. We celebrated every small victory together. Somewhere along the journey, those dreams were replaced by expectations. Love had been replaced by entitlement. Partnership had been replaced by calculation. The silence on the phone lasted several moments. Then I heard Rachel quietly whisper 2 words. "I'm sorry." I believe she meant it. For the first time in a long while, her apology sounded genuine. Perhaps losing the life she expected had forced her to recognize what she had truly lost. I accepted her apology because holding on to anger would only keep me trapped in the past. But accepting an apology isn't the same as rebuilding trust. Some things, once broken, simply cannot be restored to what they once were. Over the following year, I stopped looking backward and started investing in my future. I expanded my construction company into neighboring cities and hired several new employees. Watching the business continue to grow brought me a sense of pride that had nothing to do with money. I also reconnected with family members I hadn't spent enough time with during those busy years, and rebuilt friendships that had been neglected while I focused only on work. Most importantly, I rediscovered myself. For years, I had worked endlessly trying to provide the perfect life for someone else. Now I worked because I genuinely loved what I had built with my own hands. I no longer felt the need to prove my success to anyone. Peace had become more valuable than approval. Looking back, losing my marriage was one of the most painful experiences of my life. But losing someone who valued my bank account more than my character eventually became an unexpected blessing. The experience taught me lessons that no amount of success could ever buy. Money can attract attention. Success can attract admiration. But only character reveals who truly belongs in your life when circumstances change. Greed has a strange way of destroying the very future it hopes to claim. If there is one lesson I hope everyone takes from my story, it is this. Choose a partner who celebrates your effort, your integrity, and your dreams, not just your income. A real relationship is built on trust, respect, loyalty, and shared sacrifices. People driven only by greed will always calculate what they can gain. People driven by love will always ask what they can build together. And in the end, the courtroom didn't simply divide our assets. It revealed something far more valuable. It revealed the truth about who we really were.